Of someone on an adult website without their consent. State lawmakers unanimously passed what's known as the revenge porn bill earlier this year, and it went into effect last week.
And as Fox 5's Claire Sims explains now, the bill's sponsor says that it's important for Georgia laws to keep up with criminals.
And that's one of the things we want to do is try to deter, because it has such an impact onto a person's lives.
State Senator Harold Jones was the primary sponsor of Senate Bill 78, known as the revenge porn bill. The new law went into effect July 1st and says anyone convicted of posting explicit photos or videos of another adult online in order to harass that person is guilty of a misdemeanor. But the crime becomes a felony if the website, message board, or file sharing site where they post the material promotes itself as an adult website.
We have to kind of get more serious penalties when you escalate this type of crime to that level.
Anyone found guilty of felony revenge porn can be sentenced to 1 to 5 years in jail and up to $100,000 fine, or both. Senator Jones was also the sponsor of a 2019 law that made it illegal for people to coerce or blackmail someone into sending them explicit photos. He says it's important for state lawmakers and state laws to stay current.
We always have to keep up with technology, and unfortunately, how persons who want to commit criminal acts also keep up with technology.
Senator Jones says he keeps tabs on how other states handle these types of crimes so that he can update our laws if needed to keep Georgians safe.
We want victims of sexual assault to know that you do have rights. You can fight back, and we can help. Sexual assault is an awful thing to live through, and it's a hard thing to live with. Sometimes can be a stigma attached to it. I feel like sometimes people are afraid to come forward, or even sometimes feel like they're ashamed to come forward. If a victim of sexual assault or rape chooses to take action against her or his attacker, we're there to help. The term sexual assault gets thrown around a lot, but sometimes people aren't sure exactly what it means in a legal sense. It actually is not that complicated. A sexual assault is an unauthorized touching that is sexual in nature. Rape is a kind of sexual assault. Obviously, rape is sexual intercourse to which the victim didn't consent. Consent is a simple issue in practice and in the law. It means what you think it means. It means, did both people want to be involved in whatever it was that occurred? Consent can be verbal, of course. Someone can say, yes, I want to do this. Consent can be inferred sometimes from body language. You see this often in the sexual context, of course, with hugging and kissing that might lead to something else. Consent does not necessarily mean fighting. There's a misconception perpetrated by a few sometimes that unless there was like a brawl and shouting and fighting, then consent must have been given. That's just not true. If a victim to a sexual assault or rape did not agree, then there was no consent, regardless of whether there was fighting or brawling or that kind of thing. This matters and comes up in the legal context often where a person feels threatened. So oftentimes a victim or a survivor very reasonably doesn't fight physically or doesn't try to escape or run off. And often it's because that victim feels threatened in some way or another. Maybe it's because there's a gun on the hip of the attacker. Maybe it's because the attacker is in some position of authority. But if the survivor or victim doesn't consent, doesn't agree to what goes on, then it's sexual assault or rape, regardless of whether there's fighting, brawling, or an overt attempt to escape.
Sometimes the sexual assault is less than full penetration. You can be assaulted sexually if someone touches you in any way that is sexually inappropriate, whether there's penetration or not. And all of those different types of inappropriate touching can give rise to and give you claim for a sexual assault. We take on civil sexual assault cases, and a lot of people don't know what that means. Sexual assault and rape can be the same thing. Rape is the criminal term. So it's the term when the state brings a case against someone and they might go to jail. The criminal case is brought by the state of Georgia, so it would be a prosecutor, a solicitor, someone who is an employee of the state of Georgia. Civil sexual assault case would be brought by us, and that's where we would pursue either your assailant, the employer of your assailant, or someone like that who has or bears some responsibility for the assault, and we would pursue a money judgment against them. The criminal case brings charges and may result in someone going to jail, whereas the civil case is what leads to a money judgment, hopefully against your assailant.
There are cases where, for whatever reason, the state or federal government doesn't bring a criminal case. That doesn't mean you can't bring a civil case. A civil case can be brought even if there was no criminal arrest or criminal prosecution. In some circumstances, a civil case can go beyond just seeking compensation and seek what's called an injunction. We have one case in which a preacher molested an underage girl. And part of what we're seeking in that case is an injunction, that is a court order preventing this preacher from ever preaching again. It's always best to learn about the case fast because you can move on acquiring the evidence quickly. Lots of evidence just doesn't last very long. For instance, surveillance cameras like you might have in apartments or hotels or even some gas stations can sometimes record important events, but they tend to get recorded over pretty quickly.
One thing that we work really hard to do in the Butler Law Firm is make sure that we get evidence and make sure that your case is as strong as it can be. One way we do that is by sending what we call preservation of evidence letters. And the second we sign up a client, we're drafting those letters to get out that day to make sure that that evidence is protected for your case.
We like to move fast, but we do understand that in sexual assault and rape cases, sometimes it takes a while for the survivor or victim to decide whether she or he is going to come forward. And we can deal with that. In a sexual assault or rape case, the first thing we do is try to understand exactly what happened and where it happened and how it happened. For instance, if someone was able to break into an apartment complex or came past a broken gate or went past a guard shack where no one was checking IDs like they were supposed to and then committed a sexual assault. Sometimes that apartment complex bears responsibility for what happened. So we try to look at all these angles, not only at the attacker, but also at where it happened and why it happened. Was there negligent training, negligent supervision going on? These are all questions that we ask and that any good lawyer should ask in sexual assault and rape cases. In sexual assault cases, as with any other kind of case, you only get one shot. You can only bring a case once, bring a claim once, settle a case once, try a case once. So it's important, we think, for survivors or victims to choose a lawyer who respects their wishes. Different survivors of sexual assault and rape have different priorities. Many want to keep things quiet and want to keep their name out of the press and out of court filings to the extent that's possible. And we're here to help do that. Others want to be more public about it. There are some survivors or victims who want to talk and want the world to know what happened. Whatever approach our clients want to take is the approach that our law firm will take. We respect the rights and the wishes of our clients, as any lawyer should. Along those lines, we'd encourage victims or survivors to check us out. Look online at our reviews. We've got a bunch of them. We'd encourage survivors to look for law firms who care about this issue. You can find on our website some pictures and things from some time I took to go down to the Capitol, the Georgia Capitol, to advocate on behalf of victims.
What this new bill does is it closes that loophole. That's a good thing for victims, and it's a good thing for Georgia.
There was a conference and a meeting down at the Capitol. We went down there with a client of mine to meet and press for change. We continue to do things like that to try to help people not only through our role as lawyers, but also as citizens. So not only by bringing cases, but also by having an active voice in legislation and laws being made in the capital of this state.
have some information for you about PPP loans. If you filled out a PPP loan application and you provided any misleading information on that application, you could potentially be charged with PPP fraud or loan fraud. Now, how does this work and what kind of misrepresentation are we talking about? Well, the fraud statute says that any material fact, material misrepresentation or omission. So that means if you put anything on the form or left out anything on the form that would cause the government to have given you the loan, but it wasn't true. For instance, if you said you had more employees than you had, if you said that you had less money in the bank than you had, if you overstated or exaggerated your need for the loan, then that would be fraud. So what happens? Any of the money that you obtained from the loan would have to go back to the government. Now, is that going to be it? Probably not. So how will you know if you're under investigation? Chances are the federal government will put a freeze on your bank accounts. So your bank may notify you, or you may just find out when you go to conduct a transaction that your accounts have been frozen. At the moment that you find out about this, it is imperative that you contact me, call my office, and get on top of it. Once your accounts are frozen, that means that the U.S. Attorney's Office is involved, that the federal agency is involved, and that they are ultimately most likely going to file criminal charges. Now, you might ask, if I give the money back, will they not file charges? Will they agree to not file charges? And the answer to that question is probably not. It's kind of like going into the mall and stealing a pair of jeans and getting caught outside by the security guard and then saying, well, here, take the jeans back. Well, you still committed petty theft. So in this case, if you have committed fraud, even if you give the money back, there is a good possibility that you will be charged. So what are you looking at? What kind of sentence is possible in a case like this? It depends on the amount. If you borrowed $100,000, it's going to be a completely different case than if you borrowed a couple of million or several $1 million. The way it works in federal court is that the federal sentencing guidelines apply, and there's a base offense level, and then the number of months that are added onto the sentence are determined by the amount of loss. So you say, well, if I give them the money back, there's no loss. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. It's intended loss. And what I can tell you about it. And that brings me to PPP loan fraud sentencing. So PPP loans are a federal program. So any case involving PPP loans are going to be charged in federal court. This means that the federal sentencing guidelines apply. So the federal sentencing guidelines chart, and you can see I use this a lot, is based on this graph. So if you can see, there's a column going this way and a column going this way. This column is the offense level, and this column is the criminal history category. And in the middle are series of numbers which correspond to numbers of months. So let me explain, what does this mean, okay? So this column, the offense level column, every crime is assigned a specific offense level. So if you're charged with a theft crime, your base offense level would be 7. Okay, so that brings us here. Assuming you have no prior convictions, you would be in this first row, okay? Then the next calculation is based on the amount of money that was taken. So if you have taken out a $20,000 loan, the offense level is not going to increase that much, and there is likely not going to be prison time involved. Probably a felony conviction and probation and restitution, which means you have to give the money back. But they probably will have already seized your account or frozen your account and seized the funds if they're still in the account. The next level of case that I am dealing with, and these are the cases that are being charged, I've been watching the news, I've been getting the Google alerts. The cases that are being charged are the cases that are hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, okay? So these cases would have a higher offense level because the offense level is based on the amount of money or the amount of loss. So even if you didn't get the money, if you asked for it by fraudulent means, you can still be charged with fraud.